Thursday, June 7th, 1945. Fort Oglethorpe, Georgia, United States. Oberaufseherin Ilse Schneider's hands trembled as she stared at the metal tray before her. Steam rose from a thick cut of beef, actual beef, not the ersatz mystery meat or watery turnip soup she'd subsisted on for the past 2 years. The smell hit her like a physical force, rich, fatty, impossibly real. Her stomach clenched so violently she gasped. Around her in the mess hall, 43 other German women guards sat in similar states of paralysis. The clatter of American servers distributing food echoed off concrete walls. Potatoes, real potatoes, not the black, frozen lumps from the Eastern Front. Green beans glistening with butter, white bread, milk in glass bottles. This is poison, Ilse thought, her mind racing. They're fattening us before the execution, or it's drugged, or... Das kann nicht sein, whispered Margareta Hoffmann beside her, a former SS Helferin from Ravensbrück. Her voice cracked. This cannot be real. But it was. The heat radiating from the plate proved it. The aroma flooding Ilse's nostrils proved it. The casual efficiency of the American soldiers serving it, as if feeding prisoners steak were the most ordinary thing in the world, proved it most of all. The believer's Ilse Schneider had been a true believer. Born in Dresden in 1919, she joined the Bund Deutscher Mädel at 14, absorbing every word about Germanic superiority and the decadence of Anglo-American culture. By 1942, she was supervising female prisoners at a labor camp outside Berlin. The propaganda was clear. Americans were weak, soft, corrupted by Jewish influence and Negro culture. Their soldiers were cowards. Their nation was on the verge of collapse. She'd seen the propaganda posters plastered across every barrack, emaciated American children begging for bread, while their plutocrat fathers smoked cigars. The newsreels showed Detroit in ruins, New York plagued by strikes and crime. Minister Goebbels himself had declared that American industrial capacity was a Jewish lie, inflated numbers designed to demoralize the superior German fighting spirit. Ilse had believed it all. Why wouldn't she? In the winter of 1944-45, she'd watched her own rations shrink to 1,200 calories per day. When they came at all, the guards ate better than the prisoners, yes, but not by much. Bread was increasingly sawdust. Meat was a memory. Coffee was roasted acorns. The numbers painted a stark picture of Axis deprivation versus Allied abundance. Daily German military rations, 1945. 2,000 calories, often unrealized. Daily American military rations, 1945, 4,200 calories, consistently delivered. German meat allocation per week, 250 grams American meat allocation per week, 1,800 grams German coffee substitute, roasted barley and acorns. American coffee, real Brazilian beans, 1 pound per week per soldier. American industrial production dwarfed Germany's by every measure. In 1944 alone, the United States manufactured 96 Sukhoi 318 aircraft, while Germany produced 40,593. American steel production reached 89.6 million tons. German production barely topped 28 million. The U.S. built 17,248 tanks that year, while Germany, despite heroic efforts, managed 9,761. But Ilse didn't know these numbers. She knew only hunger, exhaustion, and the constant assurance that final victory was near, that secret weapons would turn the tide, that the Americans were collapsing from within. Then came April 1945, the collapse of the Reich, the chaotic surrender, the train ride across France to the coast, then the impossible voyage across an ocean she'd been told was blockaded. The arrival at this place called Fort Oglethorpe, a converted military training facility in the American South. And now, this tray of food that made no sense. The first shock, Ilse forced herself to pick up the fork. Her fingers looked skeletal against the clean metal. When had American prisoners of war received clean utensils? The beef glistened. She could see the grain of the meat, the char marks from a grill. This wasn't boiled or stewed into submission. This was prepared. She cut a small piece. The knife slid through easily. Another impossibility. Tough, stringy meat was all she'd known for years. This was tender. She lifted it to her mouth. The taste exploded across her tongue. Salt, fat, the complex, almost sweet flavor of properly aged beef. Her eyes filled with tears. She couldn't stop them. Across the table, Margaret was crying too, chewing slowly, her face a mask of confusion and something close to grief. "Why?" Margaret whispered. "Why would they do this?" It was the question that would haunt them all. Enemy prisoners, guards from concentration camps no less, being fed like what? Like guests? Like human beings worthy of nutrition. An American sergeant walked past their table, checking that everything was in order. He was young, maybe 22, with an easy smile and clean uniform. "You ladies need anything else? More milk. There's pie for dessert." Pie. The word hung in the air like an absurdity. Ilse stared at him, searching for mockery in his expression. She found only casual friendliness, the same tone one might use with factory workers on a lunch break. He's not pretending, she realized with growing horror. This is normal to him. The meal continued in near silence, broken only by the sounds of hesitant eating and occasional sobs. When servers brought out the promised pie, actual apple pie with flaky crust and visible chunks of fruit, several women refused to touch it. It was too much. The cognitive dissonance was physically painful. Ilse forced herself to take a bite. Cinnamon and sugar, butter in the crust. Real apples, not the wormy, half-rotten ones salvaged from abandoned orchards. The pie was better than anything she'd eaten in 5 years of war. She thought of the prisoners she'd supervised, the rations she'd distributed, thin soup, hard bread, sometimes nothing. The orders from above, efficiency, productivity, minimize waste on expendable labor. And here she was, a captured enemy guard, being served pie. The accumulation begins. The food was only the beginning. Over the following days, the evidence accumulated like water behind a dam, building pressure against everything Ilse had been taught. Day 3, the showers. The guards were processed through a medical facility. Ilse expected humiliation, perhaps abuse. Instead, she was directed to a shower room with individual stalls, hot water, genuinely hot water, not lukewarm at best, and soap. Real soap that lathered, that smelled of lavender. She stood under the spray for 15 minutes, unable to believe the Americans would waste fuel heating this much water for prisoners. The soap bar was stamped with a brand name, Ivory. She turned it over in her hands. It was fresh, unused, given to her as if it were nothing. In Germany, soap had been rationed since 1942. Fat reserves had been depleted. Citizens made do with harsh substitutes that barely cleaned. And here, unlimited hot water and fresh soap for captured enemies. Margaret emerged from the next stall with wet hair and red eyes. "My husband," she said quietly, "would boil water on the stove for a bucket bath, once a week if we were lucky. He'd wash first, then me, then the children in the same water." They'd been given towels, clean, white, soft towels, not repurposed rags, but actual cotton towels that absorbed water efficiently. Ilse held hers and felt something crack inside her chest. Day 7, the medical examination. A female American doctor examined each prisoner thoroughly. She was professional, efficient, and startlingly gentle. She noted Ilse's malnutrition, her vitamin deficiencies, the chronic infections from untreated dental problems. "We'll get you on a vitamin supplement," the doctor said in careful German. "The dentist will see you next week. Those infected molars need to come out." Ilse blinked. "Dentist? Of course, we can't have you in pain." The concept was alien. In Germany, dental care had become a luxury by 1944. Soldiers had priority. Civilians made do. Camp guards certainly had no access to dentists for routine care. And here was an American doctor casually offering to fix the teeth of a prisoner, an enemy prisoner, as if oral health were a basic right. The doctor prescribed medication for Ilse's chronic bronchitis. Real medication, not the fake pharmaceutical substitutes Germany had produced when chemical supplies dwindled. The pills came in a labeled bottle with typed instructions. Later, Ilse learned the medical facility stocked over 3,000 different medications. In Germany, pharmacies had been reduced to about 200 available drugs by 1945, many of dubious effectiveness. Day 12, the library. The camp had a library for prisoners. Ilse walked into the small building with Margaret and froze. Shelves of books lined 3 walls. Not propaganda, not approved party literature, but novels, histories, even some German language classics. An American corporal staffed the desk. "You can check out up to 3 books at a time," he explained. We've got German newspapers too, once they're cleared by intelligence. And magazines. Magazines. Current magazines showing American life. Ilse picked up a Life magazine from May 1945. She flipped through pages showing American factories, suburban homes, department stores bursting with goods. The photographs contradicted everything Goebbels had broadcast. One image stopped her, a supermarket in California. Shelves stacked floor to ceiling with canned goods, fresh produce in bins, a butcher counter with hanging cuts of meat. The caption explained this was a typical neighborhood grocery store. "It's staged," Margaret said, looking over her shoulder. "Propaganda photography." They gathered all the food in Los Angeles to one store for the picture. But Ilse noticed the customers in the background. Housewives in everyday dresses casually filling shopping carts with what looked like a week's worth of food. Their expressions showed no excitement, no gratitude for scarce resources, just normal shopping. If this was propaganda, it was remarkably mundane propaganda. Week 3. The work assignment: prisoners were assigned light work duties. Nothing punishing, just enough to maintain order and routine. Ilse was assigned to the camp laundry facility. The machinery astonished her. Industrial washing machines, electric dryers, steam presses, everything automated, efficient, maintained. A single operator could process more laundry in an hour than a squad of German washerwomen could manage in a day. The German laundry technology she'd known: manual scrubbing, boiling pots, hand-wringing, line drying. The Americans' machines that did everything, and they used them for prisoner laundry. The waste haunted her. Water flowed constantly. Hot water, gallons upon gallons, simply draining away after use. In Dresden, her mother had saved every drop of wash water for secondary uses: mopping floors, watering the garden, cleaning shoes. Here, it just disappeared down drains. The American supervisor, a middle-aged woman named Mrs. Patterson, noticed Ilse's shocked expression as another load of water drained away. "Something wrong, honey." "The water," Ilse managed. "So much water." Mrs. Patterson looked confused. "Well, yes, the machines use a lot. But water's cheap. Don't you worry about that." Cheap. Water was cheap. Fuel to heat, it was cheap. The electricity to run these massive machines was cheap enough that American prison camps used it for captured enemies' laundry. Ilse remembered standing in line for 2 hours in Berlin for a single bucket of coal in January 1945. Remembered her mother crying when the electricity cut out again, leaving them in freezing darkness. Week 5. The recreation. The camp organized a volleyball game. Americans versus prisoners, voluntary participation. Ilse watched from the sidelines, unable to process the scene. Soldiers and captured enemies playing a game together, laughing when someone missed a serve. One of the American guards, a young private named Tony, sat down next to her. "You don't want to play?" "I don't understand this," Ilse said carefully in her limited English. "Volleyball? It's easy. I can teach you." "No, this." She gestured at the game, the camp, everything. "Why you treat us like persons?" Tony considered the question seriously. "Well, you are persons. I mean, the war's over. You're not going anywhere. Might as well make the best of it, right? Besides, my orders are to treat prisoners humanely. That's what we do. That's what we do." As if humane treatment were automatic, unremarkable, the default setting, rather than a radical departure from expectation. The volleyball game continued. One of the American soldiers brought out a portable radio and tuned it to a music station. Jazz poured out. Music Ilse had been taught was degenerate, the product of inferior races, but it was undeniably energetic, complex, technically sophisticated. She watched the Americans singing along, saw her fellow prisoners tentatively tapping their feet. The music wasn't trying to convince anyone of anything. It just was. Week 7. The visit camp administrators arranged a supervised trip to the nearby town of Fort Oglethorpe, a civilian goodwill gesture carefully monitored but real. Ilse and 30 other prisoners rode a bus through American streets. The houses stunned her. Individual homes, most of them, with yards and gardens, paint that wasn't peeling, cars and driveways, multiple cars, as if owning an automobile were normal for working-class families. The streets were paved, clean, intact. They passed a high school. Teenagers were leaving for the day, carrying books, laughing in groups. They looked healthy, well-fed, carelessly confident. One girl wore a sweater that looked hand-knit, but with perfect clean wool, the kind of textile that had vanished from German civilian markets by 1943. The bus stopped at a park. The prisoners were allowed to walk around for 30 minutes. Ilse sat on a bench and watched American children play. They had rubber balls, metal playground equipment, real leather shoes. A mother sat nearby with a baby carriage, reading a magazine while her infant slept. The baby carriage was spotless, well-made, clearly manufactured rather than cobbled together from scraps. In Germany, baby carriages had become heirlooms, repaired and repaired again, passed through families because new ones couldn't be produced. This mother had a new one, and she took it for granted. Margrethe sat down beside Ilse. Neither spoke for a long moment. Finally, Margrethe whispered, "We lost, didn't we? Not just the war. Everything. We lost everything, and we never even had a chance." Ilse couldn't answer. The words stuck in her throat. Week 9. The letter home prisoners were permitted to write letters to family in Germany, subject to censorship review. Ilse stared at the blank paper for an hour before beginning. What could she say? How could she explain that the enemy was feeding them better than German civilians had eaten in years? That American prison camp guards played volleyball with their captives? That the material abundance here made the fatherland look like a primitive backwater? She wrote carefully, "I am well. The Americans treat us correctly. There is sufficient food. I hope you are managing. I think of you constantly." Sufficient food. The understatement of her life. She didn't mention the steak, now served twice a week. Didn't mention the fresh vegetables at every meal, the milk, the occasional desserts. Didn't mention that she'd gained 15 pounds in 2 months and felt healthier than she had since 1942. What she wanted to write. We were lied to. About everything. The Americans aren't weak or collapsing. They're so strong, so rich, so advanced that they can afford to treat their enemies better than we treated our own people. Everything. The propaganda, the promises, the justifications, all lies. But she couldn't write that. The censors would cut it, or worse, it might hurt her family if authorities interpreted it as defeatism. She sealed the letter and handed it to the American corporal managing the mail. He smiled at her. Should reach Germany in about 3 weeks. Mail's getting through pretty regularly now. 3 weeks. The logistics of delivering mail from a prison camp in Georgia to occupied Germany within 3 weeks spoke to organizational capability that staggered her. Germany couldn't deliver mail within its own borders reliably in the final year of war. The breaking point. It came on a Tuesday morning in late August. Ilse was folding laundry in the facility when Mrs. Patterson called her over. "Ilse, honey, could you help me with something?" She led Ilse to a storage room. Inside were boxes upon boxes of surplus supplies, soap, towels, sheets, all excess inventory being prepared for disposal. "We're clearing out old stock," Mrs. Patterson explained. "New shipment coming in. Some of this stuff's been sitting here 6 months, and regulations say we rotate stock. Could you help me load it for donation?" Ilse stared at the boxes. 6 months old, and they were discarding it as outdated. Soap that Germany would have treasured, towels that could have served for years, all being thrown away because they'd sat unused for half a year. "Where?" Ilse's voice cracked. "Where does it go?" "Oh, churches mostly. Charities. They distribute it to folks who need it." "You give it away." "Well, sure. Can't use it here, and it'd be wasteful to just trash it." Wasteful. The word hung in the air like an accusation. This abundance was so overwhelming that carefully manufactured goods, items that required resources, labor, industrial capacity, could be casually discarded as surplus after mere months of storage. Ilse picked up a bar of soap, ivory soap identical to what she'd been given on her first day. She thought of her mother in Dresden, rationing soap slivers, making 1 bar last month's. Thought of the substitute soap that left skin raw and clothes dingy. Thought of the winter when there'd been no soap at all, just cold water and prayer. And here, boxes of soap being given away because it was 6 months old. Something broke, not dramatically, not with tears or hysterics, but with quiet, irrevocable finality. The careful structure of beliefs she'd built her entire adult life around simply collapsed. She sat down hard on a crate. Mrs. Patterson, concerned, started to ask if she was all right, but Ilse held up a hand. "One moment, please." The realization rolled through her in waves. The war hadn't been lost because of betrayal or sabotage or insufficient will. It had been lost before it started. You couldn't fight this casual, overwhelming, barely noticed abundance, this civilization that threw away what Germany would kill for. The steak hadn't been kindness. The hot water hadn't been generosity. The medical care, the library, the volleyball games, none of it was exceptional by American standards. It was just normal. The baseline. What they did automatically because they could afford to, because resources were so plentiful that even enemies warranted basic dignity. Germany had been fighting with swords against machine guns. No, worse than that, with wooden clubs against aircraft carriers. The material disparity was so vast that ideology became irrelevant. You couldn't make up this gap with superior will or racial destiny or any of the lies she'd been fed. Margarete found her there 20 minutes later, still sitting on the crate, holding a bar of surplus soap. "Ilse, we never had a chance," Ilse said quietly. "From the very beginning, we never had even the smallest chance, and they sent millions of us to die anyway." Margaret sat beside her. After a moment, she took Ilse's hand. "I know," she whispered. "I know." Around them, boxes of surplus supplies waited for donation. Outside, American guards went about their routines. In the mess hall, dinner preparations began. Tonight was pork chops and roasted potatoes. The war was over, the lies were exposed, and the soap in Ilse's hand felt heavier than any weapon she'd ever carried. Aftermath: Ilse Schneider returned to Germany in March 1946. The train ride from the port took her through devastated landscapes, cities reduced to rubble, factories destroyed, populations living in cellars. She carried a small bag of possessions and weighed 142 pounds, more than she'd weighed since 1941. Her mother met her at the Dresden station. The old woman looked skeletal, aged decades in the 2 years since Ilse had last seen her. They embraced on the platform, and Ilse felt her mother's bones through thin clothing. "You look well," her mother said wonderingly. "They didn't starve you?" "No, Mutti, they didn't starve us." She couldn't explain more. How could she tell her mother about the steak, the soap, the casual abundance? Her mother was receiving 1,050 calories per day from British occupation rations, less than German concentration camp prisoners had gotten. The contrast was too cruel. Ilse found work in a textile factory being rebuilt under occupation supervision. American advisors oversaw the reconstruction, bringing machinery, materials, techniques. She watched them work with the same efficient casualness she'd seen in the prison camp. This was just what they did: rebuild, reorganize, supply, as if they had infinite resources, which she realized they effectively did. In 1948, she attended a re-education lecture series required for former camp personnel. An American educator explained the war, the camps, the crimes. Ilse listened to details of atrocities she'd somehow not seen, not fully understood, not allowed herself to comprehend while caught up in the machinery. The lecturer displayed photographs from liberated concentration camps. Then, deliberately, he showed photographs of American farms, factories, cities. "This," he said, pointing to an image of a Kansas wheat field stretching to the horizon, "was your real enemy. Not inferior races, not Jewish conspiracies, but this: agricultural abundance you couldn't match. This: industrial capacity you couldn't imagine. This: a population fed well enough, healthy enough, educated enough to sustain total war while maintaining civilian prosperity." The wheat field looked like something from a dream. Ilse remembered the desperate harvest efforts of 1944, every scrap of German agriculture mobilized to feed a starving nation. One American state produced more wheat than the entire Reich. In 1967, a young historian interviewed her for a project on POW experiences. Ilse, now 48 and working as a school administrator, spoke carefully about her time at Fort Oglethorpe. "The steak bothered me most," she told him. "Not the medical care or the showers or the library. The steak, because it was so unnecessary. They could have fed us gruel and met their obligations under the Geneva Convention, but they served us steak because that's what they fed their own soldiers, because maintaining that abundance cost them less effort than restricting it would have." She paused, collecting herself. I realized, holding that tray of food, that we'd been fighting a nation that could afford to treat its enemies better than we treated our own people. That's not a war. That's a mismatch so profound it becomes almost cosmological. We were ants declaring war on humans. The historian asked if she'd ever regretted her service to the Reich. Ilse was quiet for a long moment. "Every day," she finally said. "Every single day. But the regret isn't just about the crimes or the lies. It's about the waste. All those lives, millions of lives, spent fighting a war we'd already lost before the first shot, and we never even knew it." She lived until 1994, long enough to see German reunification and the final collapse of the Soviet system, long enough to watch her grandchildren grow up in a prosperous, peaceful, democratic Germany that would have been unrecognizable to her younger self. She kept one possession from her time at Fort Oglethorpe, a bar of ivory soap, never opened, wrapped in paper from 1945. She showed it to her grandchildren sometimes, holding the small white bar like a museum artifact. "This," she'd tell them, "taught me more about power than all the propaganda I ever heard. Real power isn't in how much you can take. It's in how much you can give away and barely notice." The soap sat on her shelf, a tiny monument to the day a bar of surplus cleaning supplies shattered an ideology and revealed the truth, that abundance matters more than will, that logistics defeats destiny, and that sometimes the greatest shock isn't cruelty, but its absence. Ilse Schneider never forgot the taste of that first steak. Decades later, the memory could still reduce her to tears, not from hunger, but from the weight of understanding what it had meant. The Americans hadn't won the war with that meal. They'd simply revealed with devastating clarity that the war had never been winnable at all.